I went to Patagonia with just a backpack and the vaguest of plans. Here's what happened and what I learned from it. I really had no idea what I was getting myself into, and I definitely made some mistakes along the way, but it ended up being one of the best experiences I've ever had. So, here are the top 5 things that I learned while traveling through Patagonia. Be sure to stick around to the end of the video because tip number 5 is super important. But real quick, I also wanted to give a shout out to Andrew Palem 1978, who left a comment on my packing list video asking me about my Patagonia trip. I always appreciate hearing from you guys, so please be sure to leave a comment if you have any questions, comments, or complaints. Also, please subscribe for more and check out my digital nomad packing list video after this one. All right, let's get into it. This trip started with the idea of wanting to travel from the southernmost point of South America all the way back to Colorado by bus, which I know is technically impossible due to the Darien Gap, but I figured that I would figure something out along the way, and I didn't have too much more of a plan beyond that when I got started. I was figuring it out and researching as I went. I wasn't able to complete that original goal because life got in the way, but I got pretty close, and I did end up making it all the way to Colombia by bus before having to call an audible. I think that there's a good balance between careful planning and spontaneity, because even if you are really into planning, things change all the time, especially in this part of the world. So for example, if you book all your travel ahead of time, you'll be especially screwed if one failure leads to a domino effect on the rest of your trip. I still don't know what the best approach is, but I think if you try to stay at least 2 to 4 weeks ahead of your trip, that should be good enough. Okay, let's get into the actual trip. Alright, so this story actually begins just south of Patagonia in Tierra del Fuego, and that's my first tip as well. Don't skip Tierra del Fuego. It's an island at the southernmost point in South America and is every bit as interesting and beautiful as Patagonia itself. I began my journey in the city of Ushuaia, which is known as the city at the end of the earth. And from there, I made my way up to El Calafate, El Chaltén, and finally Bariloche before I left Patagonia for Santiago de Chile. I did all this in about a month while also working part-time as a digital nomad. So I definitely didn't hit everything, but Patagonia is a big place, and I'm sure there's always a reason to go back. Ushuaia is a really chill town with a sort of Alaska vibe. It's beautiful, and it reminded me of something out of The Life Aquatic. One of the main attractions here is taking a cruise out to see the lighthouse at the end of the world, as well as some of the local wildlife, such as several different species of penguins and sea lions. There's also a national park nearby and lots of cool hiking trails. The last thing I need to mention is the Ushuaia Maritime and Prison Museum. The whole settlement of Ushuaia was originally a penal colony, and the museum is in the old prison building. The building itself is a sort of panopticon design with the different hallways from the center leading out to different sections of the museum. And then the exhibits are in the old cells. And it's pretty cool actually just to even walk around the building. Then the exhibits are split strangely sort of between a history of prisons and maritime history with an emphasis on the first Antarctic expeditions. And so there's a whole section there about naval expeditions to Antarctica, and they have models of all the ships that went on those expeditions. While I was there, actually, I learned about Shackleton and his ship, the Endurance, which ultimately led me to read Alfred Lansing's book, Endurance, Shackleton's Incredible Voyage. It's just a super interesting book. And I started reading that book while I was traveling, and it totally captivated me. It's the kind of thing that makes you, after you read a chapter, you feel good just to be like at home and dry and warm in your bed. And I won't give any spoilers, but I really enjoyed it and I'd really recommend it. And I've left some more information about it in a link in the description if you want to check it out for yourself. Actually, talking about this has got me convinced that it's worth making this sort of my tip 1B. Do not skip the Maritime Museum in Ushuaia. And finally, I'll just mention that I stayed at the Los Cormoranes hostel there, and it was a vibe. Not the most luxurious hostel by any means, but I met some really cool people there and would definitely recommend it. I left Ushuaia on a bus at 3 in the morning, heading to the town of El Calafate, the next stop on my trip. I don't remember how long the bus was supposed to take, but I didn't actually arrive until 8:30 p.m. the next day. So by my calculations, that's about 41 and a half hours on a bus. We did actually have a layover to another bus at one point, so it wasn't quite so bad, but it was still pretty bad. What happened was that when we arrived at the Strait of Magellan to cross from Tierra del Fuego to the mainland of South America, we were delayed on account of the wind. And that's my second tip. Be prepared that Patagonia is one of the windiest places on the planet. It's something to do with the rotation of the Earth that causes the winds near the southern pole to be especially brutal and unlike anywhere else. So be sure to dress accordingly. Obviously, it's important to have a good layering system, and an excellent shell is probably the most important part of that. One quick example of what I'm talking about. When I was hiking, sometimes I would have to fully zip up my shell with the hood and everything. Well, the wind was blowing so hard sometimes that it would flick the zipper around and actually hit me in the face a couple of times so hard that it actually hurt. I've never experienced wind like that before. So yeah, be careful out there. This is the kind of wind that is legitimately causing shipwrecks and knocking people over. All right, back to the story. What happened was that the Chilean Coast Guard actually closed the Strait of Magellan to ferry traffic because the wind was creating these massive waves. It was also rocking our bus back and forth as we waited there, so it wasn't safe to cross, and there was nothing we could do except wait there until the winds passed. We arrived at the strait around 11 a.m. and we weren't able to get on a ferry to cross until around 9 p.m. and the wind was blowing that entire time. There was no cell service there we were waiting either, but luckily there was a little store that sold food and I'd packed some with me as well. It might have been pretty bad otherwise, and it's always good to keep some spare food on you for times like this, granola bars, that sort of thing, which is also related to tip number 3. Be prepared by saving offline maps to your phone ahead of time. Even with an eSIM, there are a lot of places without any service in Patagonia, and that, of course, is part of the charm and a refreshing part of the vacation as well. It's really easy to save an offline map using the Google Maps application on your phone. Just open the application and click on your photo icon in the top right corner, and you just click the option for offline maps here. Then it will open this screen where you can decide on what section of the map you'd like to save. So let me just go down to Tierra del Fuego here. As you can see, it will let you save a pretty big section, but I recommend that you just save the general area of what you think you might need. When it's done, you'll see it in this offline maps folder here, and I just like to rename the file so I remember what it is, and then you're good to go. The offline maps from Google are helpful, but they do not include automated route finding for walking directions. They also aren't very good for trail maps, obviously. Personally, I pay for a subscription to an app called Gaia GPS because they have really high quality trail maps and other cool tracking features. I know AllTrails is another popular option for trail maps. I think AllTrails is pretty good for scouting locations for hikes, but you also have to buy a subscription to download their offline maps. However, you can also use another app called Maps.me that has a decent free version, and they have both city maps and trail maps for Patagonia with GPS walking directions. I'll leave links for all the apps mentioned below in the description, and you can pick the one that works best for you. Okay, let me just finish off this story now, and we'll continue on with the video. What happened after the Strait of Magellan is that when we crossed to the mainland, we were delayed again because there's actually a border crossing right there. Chile controls the strait, but it shares Tierra del Fuego with Argentina, so we obviously arrived in the evening and had to sleep on the bus until the border was open the next morning at 8 a.m. or whenever it was. There are some really nice buses in Argentina, but this was not one of them. It was an ordinary charter bus type of thing, and it was a bit on the older side as well, so it was not the greatest place to sleep. All of these delays also meant that I lost my hostel reservation. I had to figure that out on the fly when I finally arrived in El Calafate. But you know, it was all worth it in the end because I happened to meet some cool guys on the bus. We were all stranded, but we made the best of it, and I ended up traveling around with them over the next few legs of this trip. I think both of them might have stayed at the same hostel in Ushuaia as well, but we didn't connect while we were there. Overall, I kept seeing a lot of people from the Ushuaia hostel all along the way up through Bariloche, where I left Patagonia. It was cool. We were all sort of traveling independently, but roughly parallel to each other, and I became very good friends with some of them by the end of the trip. By the way, the flight from Ushuaia to El Calafate is under 90 minutes. I was thinking about that a lot during those 40 hours, but I'm always the kind of guy who prefers to go the slow and difficult way for whatever reason. Okay, El Calafate is a very small tourist town that's known for its proximity to the extremely impressive glacier, Perito Moreno. It looks just like the wall from Game of Thrones. Very cool, very worth it, but there's otherwise not much to do in the town there. Actually, I did see some flamingos there on a lake, which was pretty cool and unexpected. I didn't know they lived that far south, and I'm not sure if they migrated from Florida or what. Let me know in the comments if you think flamingos can migrate that far. We were debating that a lot on the trip. Anyways, I splurged on the glacier tour. It was $130 at the time, and I have to say it was very, very much worth it. It was cool to see it so up close and learn about the glacial environment. I would highly recommend that as well. Which actually leads naturally to my next tip, number 4. Before you buy a bunch of bottled water in Patagonia, you should know that the tap water is typically very clean. It's not a super developed area, and most of the tap water is essentially piped in from all of the local glaciers. Of course, I do recommend that you check in with somebody local when checking into your accommodation just to make sure. But in general, Argentina is known for having very good water. Sometimes you might hear that the water in a particular area has a taste to it, but that's about as bad as it gets. It's not like some of these other countries where the tap water is totally off limits. I drank the tap water my entire time in Patagonia, cooked with it, brushed my teeth with it, and I never once got sick. So make sure you double check, but don't automatically assume that it's not safe to drink the tap water in Patagonia. The next stop was El Chaltén, which is just a short 3-hour bus ride from El Calafate, and there are multiple buses going back and forth every day. Obviously, 3 hours on a bus isn't too bad, but I think that this was probably the shortest bus ride I took this entire trip, which is just to say that it's helpful to keep in mind that Patagonia is huge and very remote. So you do have to be a little intentional on how you move around, but it's a great place for a road trip as well, along Argentina's famous Route 40. Anyways, El Chaltén markets itself as the backpacking capital of Argentina, and it definitely lives up to its name. Honestly, it was probably my favorite little town that I visited in all of Argentina. It's also probably the most expensive since it's so remote and so popular. It reminds me of where my family lives in Summit County, Colorado, where there's definitely a bit of an extra tax on everything, just represented by the cost it takes to get there and bring everything in. Which also brings me to my next tip, number 5. Argentina is still very much a cash-first economy, especially outside of the capital. So it's a good idea to carry a decent amount of cash with you when traveling through Patagonia, probably more than you think you're going to need. Really, the money situation is always a bit complicated in Argentina. It's gotten better recently, but I still think the best way is to send yourself a cash transfer through Western Union. That way you'll know you'll get at least a decent rate, and you can pick it up at one of their local branches. You'll need your passport to do this, and you want to make sure you write your full name, including your middle name, for the receiver. Ask me how I know. Even still, sometimes there can be pretty long lines at the Western Union because so many locals do this as well, and sometimes they even run out of cash. So you might want to plan ahead of time and make sure you have multiple options. There are still a decent amount of businesses that don't accept cards in Argentina, or maybe they don't accept foreign cards. So you can't rely on just a credit or debit card like you can in some other places. Also, most places will give you a discount of about 10% if you pay in cash, so make sure you ask for that when you go to pay. Cash isn't just for emergencies in Argentina, it's also for daily life, so make sure you have a safe place to store it as well. Despite the costs of El Chaltén, I still really loved it because the vibes are just on point. It's very international with people visiting from all over the world. I think I met at least one person from every continent while I was there, and I don't know, it was just fun to be there and hang out with all those hiking enthusiasts. There's also, of course, some absolutely world-class hiking there, as well as longer trails for overnight backpacking and climbing. I've heard you have to pay to access a trailhead now, which is kind of a bummer because it was free before. Online it says it's 47,000 pesos for a day pass, which is honestly pretty steep. I would still go back though. I wasn't traveling with a full backpacking setup, but they do have everything available for rent there, and it'd be cool to explore that area some more on a proper backpacking trip. There are tons of glaciers and cool rock formations, including the famous Mount Fitzroy, which is the skyline you see on the label for the Patagonia clothing brand. Oh yeah, and the condors. I think I saw 6 in one day at the most. Even from a distance, you can kind of get a feeling for how huge they are, and it's so cool to see that many in the wild. There are also tons of wild guanacos in the area, which are like a cousin to llamas and alpacas, which you can also, of course, see in the Andes. And finally, I have to mention the Darwin's Rhea, which is a bipedal flightless bird that basically looks like an emu. I wasn't expecting to see something like that there either, but it was pretty cool. Overall, El Chaltén is a little expensive compared to the rest of Argentina, but extremely worth it in my opinion. There are famous hikes like the Torres del Paine loop in Chile that you usually have to book a year in advance and are highly regulated. But you can have a very similar experience, in my opinion, maybe even better, and plan your own epic backpacking trip in a place like El Chaltén. After El Chaltén, I hopped on a 24-hour sleeper bus to Bariloche. But actually, I think I'll save that story for another video. I ended up staying about 2 months in Bariloche, so there's so much more I could share about that place, and it should probably be its own video. Let me know in the comments if you're interested in that, and be sure to subscribe to see it as soon as it comes out. Alright, let's summarize. My top 5 tips for Patagonia are: number 1, don't skip Ushuaia or Tierra del Fuego. Number 2, be prepared for the wind in Patagonia. 3, be sure to save some offline town and trail maps ahead of time. 4, the tap water can be safe to drink, but please double check where you're at. And 5, it's always a good idea to carry cash in Argentina and not rely solely on a credit or debit card. Overall, traveling through Patagonia wasn't easy, but it was extremely fun, and I hope I've given you some inspiration to try something similar for yourself. So, as always, thanks for watching. Hopefully this was helpful, and let me know in the comments if I forgot anything, or if you want to share your own travel lessons. Take care.